we'll move on to item C, please.
Item 7C, receive a report and provide direction regarding amendments to San Bruno Municipal Code Title IV, Licenses and Regulations, as part of a comprehensive municipal code update.
Just making sure the electronics work, sorry. Thank you very much. So we're here tonight to talk about revisions to the Municipal Code Title IV. This was going to be a complicated presentation with numbers regarding the over 100 pages of Title IV in the staff report, but after Mr. DiMartini and Mr. Grogan's presentation on the budget, we've decided to reduce the number of slides and eliminate any numbers from the presentation. So our agenda for tonight is we have a little bit of background, especially since the city council members haven't seen one of the chapters for a couple of months. We're going to have a somewhat more detailed discussion regarding Title IV, which is called Licenses and Regulations, and then we're going to talk about next steps. So just a bit of background. We started this process in October of 2018. The City Council provided direction to the City Attorney's Office for a comprehensive amendment to the city's municipal code. And the question is, well, why are we doing this? And as a reminder, many of the sections of the code date to the 1980s. We wanted to address sort of any internal inconsistencies, changes in state law, case law, and implement best practices for the 21st century. We were also guided by the principle that if we didn't perceive, or if the City Council didn't perceive that there was a problem, we shouldn't try to implement a solution just to update the code. Because in many instances, even though the code is upwards of 20 or 30 years old, in some places, and we'll talk about this evening, it's actually working quite well, and there's no obvious need for an amendment. And of course, the City Council retains the authority to amend the code really whenever they want and when circumstances are required. So what we did back in October is we retained Quality Code Publishing with the assistance of the City Clerk's Department, and they performed an initial sort of overall legal review of all 11 titles of the code. Title 12 is zoning, and we're not going to be doing that, at least not immediately, although you have seen some amendments to the zoning code brought forward by the Community Development Department with assistance from other departments. So we estimated at that time in October of 2018 that it would take 2 to 3 years to go through all 11 titles of the code, including review by Quality Code Publishing and outside counsel. So in late October of 2018, we initiated introduction of Title I, the amendments to Title I, which is called General Provisions, and then Title II, Administration and Personnel, Chapter 2.04. And then shortly thereafter, in November of 2018, Quality Code Publishing actually completed their initial review of all 11 titles, which was great to have that so quickly. So we've sort of got these things stacked up and ready to come to you, subject primarily to constraints based on staff time to review and City Council agenda time. And as you can see, it's already late, so we'll try to do this as quickly but comprehensively as possible. So in November of 2018, the City Council did adopt amendments to Title I and a portion of Title II. What we did in Title I is we revised some sections on appeals, on claims to be consistent with new state law, and a developer indemnity topic that has come up in a number of contexts before. And then in Title II, we revised the election procedures to conform with California law. There is new state law having to do with even year elections, and also the vice mayor selection process, which was recently implemented. And then in July of 2019, the City Council adopted revisions to the rest of Title II, in all of Title III, Revenue and Finance. And so thank you to the Finance Department, especially for their assistance on that. And one of the changes that we did make in Title III at the request of the City Council was to include a provision that would allow the city, would authorize the city to collect TOT from Airbnb rentals once that program is implemented. So you've laid the groundwork for that. So let's talk a little bit about what's actually in Title IV. And Title IV is rather daunting. There are 17 chapters. The good news is that we're not proposing any amendments to 4 of those chapters. Chapter 4.08, 4.20, 4.28, and 4.56. And you might wonder, well, why is that? And I do want to have a caveat for 4.08, which is entitled Dance and Entertainment Events. You can see it's sort of the wording's a little outdated. What that really refers to are special events that occur in the city. And the city is currently working on and has already done extensive work across all different departments on working on a special events policy so that individuals who come to the city and request an event like a run or a barbecue or whatever, or a party, a block party, can go through a process for the city that allows those events to occur and allows the city to recover costs and make sure there's adequate insurance. So it's actually likely we're going to have to come back at a later date with some changes to 4.08, but we didn't want to hold anything up. I'm recommending let's just go forward. We can come back and do a cleanup later if we need to. With respect to 4.20, regulation of vehicle vendors, this is sometimes a topic that people are interested in. There's trucks outside on El Camino or other streets vending food. We are not suggesting any changes at this time to that chapter unless the City Council believes that the changes are warranted, and then we can certainly look into them. The staff report talks about the threatened litigation that occurred some years ago before I came to the city and the reason why that chapter was adopted as it was, and so we're not recommending any changes at the moment. Chapter 4.56, distribution of written materials, also comes up occasionally in 2 contexts. Mr. Reekle, who is no longer here, often provides me with a little baggie and a rock inside and a phone number, a cell number of somebody who's offering gardening services, and asks, can't we prohibit people from throwing a rock on their driveway in a little bag? And mostly the answer is, well, we can adopt an ordinance, but we can't really enforce it because it's a cell phone number, there's no address, there's no way to contact the person really. They don't have to answer the phone once they know it's the city calling, so that's a difficult thing. It also comes up sometimes when people complain about an organization putting flyers on people's windshields in a parking lot. And there's actually a case about that. One city tried to prohibit that practice, saying that flyers were going all over the place and it was creating litter in the city. And the court said, not really, you can't really prove that. People have a First Amendment right to put flyers on your windshield. And the harm to you as the individual from plucking off a flyer or collecting the rock on the driveway is so minimal that the court's going to say the First Amendment's more important. So this is the reason why we're not proposing any changes to those chapters. We are proposing repeal of 1 chapter in total, which is called item pricing, not related to Councilmember Mason's question about local preferences, but related instead to stores having to reflect items in scanners, and that has been now totally preempted by state law, so there's no reason to have that. So that's what we're not doing. So let's talk a little bit about what we are doing, and again, the good news is out of all of those chapters, we are proposing only minor wording amendments to 9 of those chapters, really to conform to state law and other wording changes. And in particular, I'm going to put a couple of these up here. 4.04, amusement facilities, no change, but that might have to be changed later with the special events policy. No changes to private parking facilities, private patrols. Let's talk about 4.36, gambling clubs. There's a couple of changes to that. Again, not related to the tax, but there's a new state law that says now cities can allow individuals who are between the ages of 18 and 20 to work in certain non-gaming floor positions at those facilities. So there's a reference to that, and we actually have to go back. Thank you to the police department for flagging something for me. We have to go back and take a look at whether we can background those people, even if they're 19 years old and want to be a cook at Artichoke Joe's as opposed to working on the gaming floor. So we'll provide that when the ordinance comes back for introduction. We have massage businesses. We're not suggesting any changes except minor ones to that. 4.42 pawnbrokers, kind of an interesting one. So some years ago, the city experienced a situation in which there was something called a reverse cellular vending machine installed at Tanforan Mall. And that is a kiosk in which somebody shows up and sticks a cellular device in there, and something happens, we're not really sure what, and money comes out. And the result of that was a substantial interest by the state attorney general's office that there was illegal sales and stolen property going on. Nobody really knew what the kiosk was doing. It was alleged that people were in Riverside County looking at a screen, looking at these machines. Anyway, so we've included that in our code to make sure that those activities which the police department and the attorney general's office had some concerns about are not allowed in the city. The only other code that might attract some interest with just minor changes are what we call trailers and trailer courts. We're not doing anything to escort services, but the trailers and trailer courts, you might wonder, well, is that people can camp in their cars? Is that some sort of, should we be looking at that more comprehensively? And basically the answer is no, despite this is one of those codes that even though it's a little on the old side, it's actually still consistent with all of the new cases and state law that's coming out. It also falls into the category of, if it's not broken and we don't have a problem right now, let's not try to write something that addresses a problem that we don't have at the moment. Again, you can always come back and revise it. So these are 9 chapters that we made only minor changes to. All right, so let's talk about the 3 chapters or the 3 policy decisions for the City Council tonight. So the first one is Chapter 4.16, Peddlers. And a peddler is somebody who sells goods and services door to door. So what we're doing with this chapter is really just making it consistent with a new state law that we're addressing in the next chapter, which is 4.18, called Pushcart and Sidewalk Vendors. So the only changes to 4.16 are really for consistency with state law and our own new chapter 4.18, which we'll get to in a second. The one important thing that we're proposing for peddlers is the addition of what we call a do not knock registry. And this was an interesting idea that I live in San Carlos, and it came up in that city, so I thought, it might be worth proposing for the city of San Bruno. And what that is residents can voluntarily register with the city clerk's office and say that they don't want individuals who are either selling goods or services to come to their door. It has nothing to do with no soliciting signs. It just says, don't knock on my door. And vendors who have to get a permit from the police department have to agree when they get that permit that they have to comply with that registry. And as a resident, I can tell you it works. I mean, since we put our name on the registry, nobody's come to our door, except individuals who are soliciting for charitable contributions, which is still allowed, and of course individuals who are engaging in political speech. So candidates, for example, may want to come door to door. So they're not peddlers or solicitors. They're not soliciting goods or services. So it's worked pretty well. It's something to consider, and so we'd want some direction from the City Council tonight about whether this is something that you're interested in. So that's one of 3 sort of policy decisions. Second one has to do with, as I mentioned, pushcart and sidewalk vendors. So there's a new state law that, surprise of surprises, limits state authority, and the purpose of the law really was to incentivize individuals to cook food and sell it to the public. And in fact, one of the articles that a legal firm put out on it was entitled, "California Cooks Up Sidewalk Vending Law." So you sort of know immediately what the intent of the legislature was. So our proposed ordinance includes all of the requirements and limitations that are allowed for us to do by state law. Well, what are those things? And briefly, it's permits, insurance, can't block the sidewalk, there's health and safety compliance. We can prohibit stationary sidewalk vendors in all residential zones. So somebody can't set up a stand that isn't roaming around in any residential zone. You can't do it if there's a certified farmers market, swap meets, or other events. Here's the interesting point, and it gets to parks. So we have to allow stationary vendors in parks unless there's a formal concessionaire. But we don't have a formal concessionaire. There are temporary concessionaires that come for different sporting events, but they're not permanently there. On the other hand, we haven't gotten anybody who wants to be a stationary vendor in any of the parks. So here's the policy direction that we're requesting. And the question is, what about roaming vendors in parks? And we already have at least one of these individuals. I think he has a little ice cream push cart. And state law is unclear. Not only do they take away city authority, but then they do it in an unclear way, unfortunately. And it looks like it says we can't outright ban roaming vendors in city parks. But state law says if you make a bunch of findings, which we did in the whereas clauses in the ordinance, you can regulate them. And how can you regulate them? Well, first you can make them comply with everything that's everybody else has to comply with, and we're proposing that. But the question for you tonight is, do we want other regulations? And those regulations have to be based on objective health, safety, or other findings. A finding that we don't like somebody selling ice cream because somebody else is selling ice cream is probably not one of those findings. So the question is, you can regulate hours, you can say only in certain parks. For example, you have 2 parks with restrooms, maybe you just want to limit it to those. We proposed, you got to stop 1 hour before the park closes. Anyway, that's an item we'll need to come back to and just need a little bit of direction from you on this evening, is what to do about the roaming sidewalk vendors, and are there any regulations that you want us to look at for those individuals? And then finally, the last policy decision has to do with Chapter 4.60, bingo. So state law has changed quite a bit since our bingo ordinance was enacted. And one of the things the state law did is it took away the ability of cities to impose a gross receipts tax, which the city had in its ordinance. So now the only fee that the city can receive from bingo operations is $50. The city can continue to receive rent for facility rental and other cost reimbursements from the Nutrition Site Council, as you know, that runs the bingo operation. So here's the question for you tonight. State law does allow the city to have discretion about how many games per week there are. And right now our ordinance says 1, but currently there are 4 occurring, and those games are occurring for money, so they all qualify as a bingo game under state law. And so what we've done is we've proposed that the ordinance be amended to say there can be 4 bingo games per week here, for example, at the senior center. And if the city council wants to exercise its discretion, they can allow 1 additional game per week. Right now, the ordinance is written 1 game a week and 1 additional game per week, which is obviously inconsistent with what's actually happening. So we just conformed it to what's actually happening and leave it up to you if you want to make any changes. A final point about this, and then I'll close, is that bingo is regulated by a section of the penal code, and the section, because it's in essence gambling, and what the penal code says is only certain organizations can operate bingo games. So for example, a city can't operate a bingo game, but a nonprofit can. And the nonprofit then is required to comply with various laws. And so they also have to use the proceeds of the bingo game only for charitable purposes. So that's what the nonprofits are dealing with. And I think you know that PTAs have school bingo games and so on. And so those are being operated by the nonprofits in connection with California law. So our next steps for this evening is to provide direction on those 3 policy issues. We are going to try to schedule, yes, we are, introduction and adoption of this in March or April, depending on what direction we receive this evening. We're also planning, Titles 5 and 6 are kind of waiting in the wings, so we can get those to you in the next number of months as staff time and agendas permit. And we are still on schedule to complete all 11 chapters by 2021. So that concludes my presentation. Again, our three policy issues are: do you want a do not knock registry? What do you want to do about regulating roaming park vendors? And do you want to have a bingo consistent with what's currently occurring? That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Just to clarify on the don't knock, I do like that approach, but also you said folks for charitable, political, but also religious as well?
Yes, that's correct, because those individuals are not selling a good or service. If they would like to solicit for their church or synagogue or religious facility, they can do that.
Okay, thank you. Question, comment? Michael?
Thank you. So the registry would be more restrictive, or having a no soliciting sign on your house. So that has no bearing on people. I mean, it's a suggestion then rather than a regulation, and this registry would then be, this would be an actual regulation.
That's right. I mean, a no soliciting sign is something that the city can't enforce. It's a neighbor, it's a resident saying, don't do this on my property, and it's like, well, okay. That's not an ordinance. There's no ordinance that says if you have a no soliciting sign, then we're going to come to your house and arrest the solicitor if they're there. So this would be a way for people to opt out. And the nice feature of it that it's totally voluntary, and it avoids the First Amendment problems with many cities trying to regulate, people coming door to door. It's very difficult to do that, and I thought San Carlos had an elegant solution to it.
And I believe the staff report said that the penalty it's limited to taking away their license, and basically telling them they can't do it anymore.
Right.
If they're not licensed in the first place, it probably
That's right.
doesn't matter.
If I may, it's also pretty similar.
Right.
Yeah, it's also pretty similar to the do not call registry. So that exists where you sign up, you put your phone numbers in there. Of course, it doesn't work all the time. Everybody
Yeah,
still gets the
I still
spam
get calls.
But for a while there, it was a good Band-Aid for the problem until they found a way around it. But in this case, it's pretty solid so far with San Carlos. They've had a lot of success with this.
Okay. And then regarding the push carts, are there any known concerns at this point that we would want to try to address with this revision?
So I checked with Joanne in the Community Services Department. She was not aware of any. Others here may have heard of things. I have not been made aware of any in staff's review of the ordinance.
Okay. All right. So I can't think of anything I would want to tack onto that unless there's specific issues that we're trying to address. And what was the other one that we had to comment on?
Registry, bingo.
Oh, and bingo. Bingo. So the limitation on the number of games per week is also per site, right? Per location.
Right.
So there could be, if every church in town wanted to have 5 bingo games a week.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Laura?
Through the chair, love the idea of the do not walk registry. I think it's a great idea. I think it's just something else
Go ahead.
that we can give these residents to make them happy. I'm also happy to know that when I didn't knock on doors because it says no solicitations, that I actually could when I was campaigning. I didn't realize that. So thank you for clarifying that piece. It's funny. One of the only highlights I had on your report, Mark, was the 6 to 9 p.m. on the peddlers. I just thought that was kind of late, so I would say to change that language to dawn or something, because parks really close. I think they should be out of there by the time parks. I don't really want to see them at night when it's too dark. So it's been dark at 6 o'clock for a lot of weeks, and I would not want to see them in the parks during that time. And then I have no problems with the bingo.
I did ask staff about that because I thought, that seems kind of late. And the response from staff was, well, there's concerts in the park. There are other things that go into the evening, and so is there a problem with having the vendors there later? And that's up to you.
That's good feedback. Does it change my mind? I think for the I mean, that's a good question. So is a peddler considered somebody from a Lions group or somebody else? No, right?
No, these are roaming vendors who are selling primarily food.
Yeah.
And that's what the new law is directed to. And so the question is, do you want to restrict the hours, or do you want to restrict the parks? And one way you could rationally restrict the parks they operate in is to say, well, only 2 of them have restrooms, and we really shouldn't be having people selling food in parks that don't have restrooms. So that would be a rational thing to do, but it's a policy decision.
Marty?
Okay, I'll hear
I got to follow up with that. Is there a limit on the number of
peddlers.
push carts in the park? Is there?
You could impose a limit, but you have a really high standard for making some findings about that. That there's an over-concentration, that there's dozens of them, that they're running into each other, and I don't think we have the factual basis
Okay.
to make that.
Just curious about that. 'Cause currently we don't have a problem with it, but if there were 8 people trying to do that, then it could be a little bit of a problem. And I'm fine with the don't knock. I like that, and the bingo. That's great. So I'm on board with those.
Linda?
So I'm fine with the do not knock. Thank you for bringing that to us. I think it's a great idea. The roaming park vendors, the ones that I see, there's 2 of them, the woman who sells the fruits and the gentleman who sells ice cream, and I speak with them regularly. And
What
I
was
think
the first one again?
The woman who sells the fruits.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they both leave at around 4 anyway. If there was going to be any kind of mandate that they have to leave early, I would say an hour before park closes, but the reality is I haven't seen that being an issue, that they're staying really late. And I honestly, for things like movies in the park and nice days in the summer, it is nice to have someone out there. The reality is that they normally aren't even out there. They leave around 4 or 5. In regards to the bingo, I'm just curious, how much were we making off these bingo games?
So that's actually turns out to be a very complicated question,
Okay.
Which I'm going to look to. Where's our finance? Oh, look, there he is. And I'm not sure that even Keith has that information tonight.
Okay.
It might be worthwhile to. Do you have anything you want to say? Yeah.
Okay.
He was too busy preparing his other 50 slides. But we can provide a summary for the city council about what that involves. There are limitations. I think it's $2,000 or something a month for rent. There's other amounts, and then most of those bingo proceeds are controlled by the nonprofit Nutrition Site Council, and so they choose how to allocate those funds. And actually, the city is restricted from spending those funds unless it's for a charitable purpose. So if the Nutrition Site Council were to give the city money to do a variety of things, which they have in the past, though that has to be for a charitable purpose, and it can't be for a non-charitable purpose.
Okay. And then, thank you for the explanation. So you were going from 1, and you said there's currently 4 games, so I would support maybe 6 in case there's a special event that week or whatever it may be. So that's what I would propose. And then I have questions about some of the other policies, since we essentially are really approving this entire policy section, correct? Those are the 3 you'd like direction on, but the entire policy is being approved.
If you have comments about any of the other sections, I'm happy to take them now. You can, if you have wording suggestions, feel free to send them to me afterward.
Okay.
And we'll take a look at them. This is going to come back for introduction, so you'll have a whole new opportunity to look at everything.
Okay.
And if individuals, if you have changes that you would like to make, I'll make sure that all of those are included in track changes, so you'll see what was suggested.
So I have just a couple of questions. I don't know if I have wording suggestions yet, but it'll help for clarification. For the 4.18.030, the permits, I'm just curious, it requires a valid City of San Bruno license. And is that for somebody who comes for a fair? Like, let's say we do someday have a wine stroller, we do someday have some event in the park, and we have a vendor. For just a one-day event, do they need to get a license?
So if they're a stationary vendor, the answer is yes, and that's authorized by the new state law. So stationary vendors would have to get a license, have insurance, and those things.
Okay.
And, I'll just say, it can be an onerous requirement. Unfortunately, what we found is that these special events are really a extremely large source of risk to the community in a whole variety of different ways. And I think it's important, the policy question for the city council is the city doing everything it can to protect the city from that risk?
Yeah, great. And what I'd like to know is how onerous that process is in other cities, because I think that's something that the community has requested and would really like to see as more community events. And how do we make that easy for vendors to come to San Bruno? And that includes something like a farmer's market as well. My next question is regarding the vehicle vendors. This is 4.20, page 139.
What's the section again, sorry?
Page 139, it's vehicle vendors.
I'm sorry, I don't have a pagination.
Okay.
What's the section again?
4.20, and it's page 139.
Point which?
4.20, it looks like .030.
Okay.
And .040. There's I have this in my notes. There's a section in here that says that it looks like the police has to somehow manage who's parking in the park with these vendors. And so just a suggestion, now that we've had a couple of events and we know the cost of police staffing for these events, is maybe also include maybe someone from Park and Rec or someone from Fire who already have to be there for the event, in lieu of having a police officer to man vendors and where they can park to ensure proper egress in case of an emergency. The next one is 4.28. And 4.28 is in regards to the auto burglary alarms. There have been a number of complaints that have come here regarding the car lots. And I am wondering if the city can actually mandate the car lots to not have burglary alarms at all on their cars, not have them on at all. So if that means that they might have to get a private security guard in the evenings, that might be an option for them. But since we're looking at this policy right now, is that an option for the city council to look at?
So I'll just quickly make a comment about that would likely have to have been included in the conditions of approval for those businesses. And so I think we know of a couple of businesses about which there have been a variety of complaints. And so that business is entitled, or businesses are entitled to operate consistent with those conditions of approval. And I think adding something into the municipal code that's outside of the zoning code that would impose that cost, I think you would see that business or businesses coming back saying, basically, you can't make me do this, it's not in my conditions of approval. But we can certainly look into, is there any change that we can make to this that would facilitate that?
Okay, that would be great, thank you. And then I'm just curious, the 4.36, you kind of touched on it for a minute, but for the work permits, I'm just curious why the chief of police approves the work permits.
So there's a extensive state regulation. This is for the card rooms?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
There is extensive state regulation regarding card rooms and gambling. And it's regulated by I'm looking at Lieutenant Johansson for the name of the state agency that regulates. It's Bureau of... Thank you. Gambling. I should have said that, right? Because obviously it's gambling.
Yeah.
It's not ATF, because we know there isn't any of that. So it's extensively regulated, and there's a police presence there, and there's a substantial tie with the police department. So that's the reason for that.
Okay.
Also, it involves significant background checks of the individuals that has to go through law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more. 4.40, the massage. So I am glad to see that there are restrictions on the hours that they're open between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Can we also ask them to turn off their red lights when they close?
So the general rule on massage establishments, again dictated by state law, is that we cannot impose any restrictions on them that are more are more stringent or different than any other service business. So I don't remember offhand what time the signs can be on until for other businesses. We can certainly do that for massage business for enforcement. I guess I would say that I've been involved in, not personally, a number of activities having to do with regulation of massage businesses. I think the appeals board has seen a number of those things, and I think I'll just say that the lights is only one of a number of very minor problems that some massage businesses may be having in the city. So the police department does focus there on really on arrests and prosecutions for prostitution and other serious crimes,
Okay.
including human trafficking.
Yeah, and it just, some of them stay open, and it's well past 9, so something to look at. And then just I'm just curious, this was a fascinating section, I must say. The escort services. I mean, how many?
There's a reason why we didn't suggest any changes to that section.
This will be my last comment, but the escort services, I mean, how many do we have here in San Bruno?
Actually, I don't know the answer to that. I do know in talking to the police department about that specific section, they didn't suggest any changes, and I think they feel comfortable that they can regulate that. That business, I think, has changed over a number of years and is now operated differently than it was when this section was adopted. But if Chief or anyone has any comments about that, we can certainly get those.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it.
Good comments.
Okay, so I hear the registry, it sounds like everybody's good on that. Mark, did you feel you got enough feedback from council?
Yes, thank
on
you.
the chapter? Okay.